My girlfriend forged a letter to ruin my dream, so I cut her off and left it all behind. My name's Travis Beck. I'm 21, from a small town in Ohio, and for as long as I can remember, I've wanted to get out. I'm not even talking about running away from something terrible. My home life was fine, more or less. But I always felt like I was meant for something else, something bigger. I studied graphic design at a local university, and while the program itself wasn't terrible, it was still Ohio. Same streets, same people, same tired campus coffee shop with overpriced muffins and lukewarm espresso. So when I saw an opportunity to apply for an exchange program in Paris, I jumped on it like my life depended on it. Honestly, it felt like it did. Paris, man. The heart of art and design. I'd been dreaming about it since high school, sketching buildings from Google Street View, watching YouTube vlogs of students who studied there, reading article after article about the scene. I could practically smell the croissants and cigarette smoke through my screen. I knew I had to make it happen. Now here's where Julian comes in. We'd been dating for about 2 years by then. She was the first person I told after I got the acceptance email. I remember sitting in her beat-up Toyota Corolla, parked outside her apartment complex, just vibrating with nerves. When I told her, she smiled, grabbed my hand, and said, "I'm proud of you." No hesitation. No guilt trip. Just that. I could have cried from the relief. That night we celebrated with grocery store champagne and frozen pizza. She posted about it too, wrote this whole thing about how proud she was of me and how it was my dream coming true. I felt like the luckiest guy alive. I really believed she meant it. So I started getting everything together. It was a long list. I had to apply for a visa, collect transcripts, get documents notarized, apply for scholarships, all while keeping up with school and my part-time job at a print shop. I even picked up extra shifts to save money. My parents helped where they could, but they were still paying off my sister's dental surgery from last year, and I didn't want to pressure them. That's when I made the hard calls. Sold my Xbox first. That stung more than I expected. I'd had it since high school, and it still had the sticker Julian gave me in our first year together, this dumb little doodle of us holding hands. After that, I listed my laptop, my baby, a 2020 MacBook Pro that I'd saved up for through 2 summers of mowing lawns. I got $800 for it, which honestly wasn't bad, but it felt like I was giving away a piece of myself. But I kept telling myself, Paris is worth it. Julian said she understood. She even helped me write out my budget, told me I was being brave, that most people wouldn't sacrifice like this. She was there when I boxed up the laptop, sat on my bed, and just stared at it before sealing the box. She kissed my cheek and said, "This is going to be so worth it." But after that, things started to shift. It wasn't big at first, just small stuff. She'd get quiet when I talked about travel insurance or my French placement exam. Or she'd change the subject when I brought up apartment options in Paris. I remember this one time. I showed her a photo of a little studio near Montmartre, tiny, barely big enough for a twin bed and a table, and I was practically giddy about how charming it looked. She just nodded and said, "Looks cold." Cold. Another time I mentioned maybe trying to freelance on the side while I was there, just small stuff to keep some cash coming in. She asked, "Isn't that going to be kind of lonely, though? Just you over there?" I shrugged it off. I mean, it was a fair question, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right. Still, I didn't want to read too much into it. I figured maybe she was just nervous about us being apart. 2 years is a long time for people our age. We met sophomore year. She was studying early childhood education, worked part-time at a daycare. She always had this warm, grounded vibe that calmed me down when I started spinning off about deadlines or what font hierarchy made the best impression. I thought we were solid. But then one night, about 2 weeks after I sold the laptop, she texted me out of the blue and asked if we could talk. Classic death sentence, right? Still, I went over. She was curled up on her couch in sweats, hair in a bun, no makeup. Her face was all tight. She didn't even look at me when I sat down. She started with, "I've been thinking," and my stomach dropped. She said she didn't think she could do long distance, that she didn't want to hold me back, that I deserved this opportunity, but that she just wasn't sure we'd work while I was gone. I asked if she was breaking up with me. She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, she said, "Maybe we should take a break, just while you're away." I sat there in silence for a full minute. I had sold my Xbox and my laptop. I had withdrawn from my savings account. I had built my entire next year around this opportunity, with her supposedly at my side, and now I was just supposed to pause everything? I asked her, straight up, "Did you mean it? When you said you were proud of me?" She hesitated again. Then she said, "I was, but I didn't think it would actually happen." That hit me like a punch. I didn't even respond. I just got up and left. I walked the 2.5 miles home in the dark, hands in my pockets, trying not to cry in the middle of the sidewalk. I didn't text her after that. She didn't text me either. And the worst part? I didn't cancel Paris. I'm still going. The visa came through last week. I bought a used Dell laptop just to get me through the basics until I can save up again. It's clunky and ugly and smells faintly of smoke, but it works. I'm leaving in 21 days. I just didn't think I'd be doing it alone. 2 weeks before my flight, I was at the library finishing up a paper for my design history class when I got the email. The subject line was bland enough. Update regarding your exchange status. I clicked it without thinking, expecting maybe a reminder to pick up some last-minute paperwork or a formality about housing. But the second I started reading, my chest locked up like I'd just been sucker punched. We regret to inform you that your application has been withdrawn due to an unresolved issue with your financial documentation. Withdrawn. That word blinked in my brain like it didn't belong there. At first I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe some database glitch or someone else's file got mixed with mine. I double and triple checked my financials before submitting everything. I even called my bank to get print statements mailed, signed, and sealed with that ridiculous little blue stamp. I'd done everything they asked. My hands were shaking as I reread the email. It said the decision was final and based on written confirmation received from the student. That stopped me cold. What confirmation? I called the exchange coordinator's office immediately, practically sprinting out of the library and into the parking lot so I wouldn't lose reception. The woman who picked up was polite but stiff, like she'd been through this conversation already. I told her my name, my program, everything. She didn't sound confused, just said, "Yes, Mr. Beck, the withdrawal request was received and processed last week. I'm looking at the confirmation letter now." I stopped walking. What confirmation letter? I didn't send anything. There was a pause. Then she said, "It was submitted under your name and student ID. The signature matches what we have on file." "No," I said, louder than I meant to. I didn't write a letter. I never withdrew. She offered to email me a scanned copy of the letter they had on file. I gave her my address and told her to send it immediately. I could barely hear the rest of what she said before I hung up and sat down on a low wall outside the math building. I waited there like a statue, watching the email inbox on my phone like it was some kind of countdown clock. It felt like everything I'd built was teetering on the edge of that one PDF file. When it came through, I opened it without breathing. The letter was short, just a few sentences, typed in a weird, overly formal tone that didn't sound like anything I'd ever write. "I hereby request to withdraw my application for the France exchange program due to personal and financial concerns. I appreciate your understanding." My name was typed at the bottom, Travis Beck. But the signature below, it was the thing that froze my spine. It looked like mine, nearly identical, but the last name was spelled wrong. B-E-C-K. That wasn't a typo I'd ever made. Not once in my entire life. My hands were ice cold. I zoomed in on the signature again and again, trying to pick it apart. The way the T curved, the pressure on the B, even the slant of the letters. Whoever did it knew how I signed my name. But that mistake, the extra E, it stuck out like a sore thumb. I called the office back and told them what I found. The woman sounded surprised, but not exactly panicked. She said the decision had already been finalized, and there wasn't anything they could do unless I filed a formal fraud complaint through the university. That would take time, she warned me. Maybe weeks. Maybe more. The flight, I'd already booked with the last of my savings. She didn't say it, but we both knew I'd never make it on time. I felt like my skin was buzzing, like the world had tilted sideways, and no one else noticed. I sat there for nearly an hour after the call ended, staring at the screen like the document might change if I looked at it hard enough. All the plans I'd made, the sacrifices, the months of preparation, gone. Not because I missed a deadline, not because I couldn't afford it, but because someone wrote a fake letter with my name on it. Someone close enough to know my signature, close enough to almost pull it off. And I had a sick, slow feeling in my gut that I already knew who. The worst part wasn't the shock. It was the slow, creeping feeling that I already knew where this was heading. Even when I was on the phone with the coordinator, staring at that scanned letter with the wrong spelling of my name, a small part of my brain had already started moving ahead of me, asking questions I didn't want to answer. Who would have access to my student ID? Who would even know enough about the process to fake something like that? Who had been in my room recently, with my computer, while I was out selling my stuff or standing in line at the consulate? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my mattress in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing down so heavy it felt like a second blanket. Around 3 a.m, I got up and sat down at my desk. I booted up the old Dell I'd picked up secondhand, the one that replaced the MacBook I sold for my Paris fund. It was slow and cranky, took almost a full minute just to get to the login screen. But once I was in, I opened my cloud drive. I had most of my school documents stored there anyway, class notes, scanned forms, PDFs of every application I'd ever sent. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I just felt like I had to check. I opened the editor I usually used for writing, the one that auto-saved everything in the cloud. I hadn't touched it in a week, maybe more. The screen blinked once, then loaded a list of my most recent files. There it was. A draft labeled withdrawal letter. Last edited 6 days ago. My heart actually stuttered. I clicked it open, and there it was. Almost word for word the same as the PDF they'd emailed me. I hereby request to withdraw my application. The same exact phrasing. Same weirdly stiff language. At the bottom, just above where the signature would go, was the misspelled name, Beck. I sat there frozen for a solid 30 seconds, just staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I hadn't written this. I hadn't even opened this editor in weeks. I looked at the revision history. The document was created from my account, on this very laptop, last Wednesday, at 1:42 p.m. Last Wednesday, I had class all afternoon. I wasn't home, but someone else was. That's when my stomach turned. I remembered. That was the day Julianne had asked if she could swing by to grab the hoodie she left in my room, the gray one with the thumb holes that she wore like it was part of her skin. I was running late for class, so I told her the door would be unlocked, and to just go in and grab it. I didn't even think twice. Why would I? I stared at the screen, my fingers numb. She had been the only person in that room while I was out. The laptop had been right there on the desk. The editor auto-signed into my account. It didn't even require a password. All she had to do was open the app and start typing. And she knew about the exchange. She knew the exact name of the program. She knew the deadline. She knew everything. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe someone else got into my room. Maybe I left the door unlocked another day. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But then I clicked into the browser history. Right there, sandwiched between a news article about the school's art exhibit and a tab for a thrift store's return policy, was a visit to the program's withdrawal form page. I sat back in the chair, heart pounding. I wanted it not to be her so badly I could feel it in my teeth. But the facts lined up too neatly. The timing, the access, the draft saved with her timestamp, and the thing that sealed it, the spelling mistake. That same mistake had shown up in a birthday card she made for me last year. She'd written, "To Travis Beck," in bubble letters and laughed about it later, said she was half asleep when she wrote it. No one else misspelled my name like that. I closed the laptop without shutting it down and just sat there, hands in my lap. I didn't know what to do, who to call, what to say. The world around me felt unreal, like the edges of the room had started to blur. All I could hear was her voice from weeks ago, saying, "I'm proud of you." And now it echoed in my head like a bad joke. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I just sat at my desk with the laptop still open beside me, the draft glowing faintly on the screen like it was mocking me. I kept thinking, maybe if I stare long enough, something else will appear. Something that makes it make sense. Something that makes it not her. But it didn't. By the time the sun started coming through the blinds, I knew I had to talk to her. I couldn't sit with it any longer, not without losing my mind. I didn't call. I didn't text. I got in my car and drove to her place, gripping the steering wheel so tight I thought I might snap it. Her apartment complex looked the same as always. The dent in the secondhand mailbox. The crooked number on her door. Everything looked normal. But nothing was. She opened the door in a sweatshirt and socks, hair still messy, phone in her hand like she hadn't even started the day yet. When she saw me, she smiled, like nothing was wrong. That smile almost broke me. I didn't say hello. I didn't step inside. I just stood there and said, "Was it you?" Her face dropped. I didn't need her to answer. The silence was loud enough. I watched her eyes change, flicker with something I couldn't quite name. Shame maybe, or guilt, or fear. She looked down at the floor like she was trying to find words there. "I didn't know what was going to happen," she said finally, her voice so quiet I could barely hear it over the blood pounding in my ears. "I didn't think they'd actually process it. I thought maybe you'd see the draft and change your mind." I stared at her. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. "I was afraid you'd go and just forget about me," she went on, still not looking at me. "Like once you were in Paris, with your new life, you'd realize you didn't need me anymore." I know it was stupid. I didn't plan to do it. She stopped and finally met my eyes. "I did it because I love you." That word landed like a stone in my chest. I couldn't even speak at first. I just shook my head. Not because I didn't hear her, but because I couldn't understand how she could say that. How she could say it like it explained everything, like it made it okay. "You forged my name," I said, my voice flat. "You signed a letter pretending to be me. You used my student ID. You ended my chance. You ended my dream." She started to cry, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Not in that moment. Not when everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed for, had been torn away by the one person I thought had my back. "I didn't think they'd accept it without confirming," she said, wiping her face. "I thought I could undo it. But then it went through, and I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to lose you. I just didn't want to lose you." I looked at her then, really looked at her. This girl I'd loved for 2 years. The person I trusted enough to leave alone in my room, to sit on my bed while I wasn't home, to know every detail of what mattered to me. And she had taken all of that and twisted it into something selfish and cruel, and still had the audacity to call it love. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just nodded once, slowly, like I'd finally accepted what I didn't want to believe. Then I turned around and walked back to my car. I didn't hear if she said anything else. If she did, I wasn't listening. I didn't tell anyone for a couple of days. I didn't have the energy to go through the questions, the sympathy, the outrage. I was just trying to exist, trying to sit in the wreckage without completely falling apart. I kept replaying her voice in my head, those quiet, pathetic words. I did it because I love you. I didn't know what to do with that. It didn't make me feel loved. It made me feel small, like my dream had been something fragile she casually stepped on and then tried to hand back to me in pieces. Eventually, I cracked. I needed to get it out of my head and into the air. I started with Mason, my roommate. He was sitting on the floor putting together a bookshelf from the thrift store, and I just said it. I said, Julian forged a letter to the exchange office and withdrew me from the program. She signed it like it was me. He blinked at me like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Wait, what? I nodded. She did it while I was in class. Used my laptop. Left a draft in my editor like she wanted me to find it, or maybe thought I wouldn't. I don't even know. He sat there holding a screwdriver and stared at me for a long second. Then he let out this low whistle and said, Dude, that's seriously messed up. After that, it spread. I didn't ask for it to, but people started hearing bits. Emily from my typography class texted me, asking if the Paris thing had fallen through. I just said yeah. She asked why, and I told her. That opened the floodgate. A few people were shocked. Most were supportive. One guy I barely knew from studio, Brian, offered to help me write an appeal letter. I appreciated it, even if I wasn't sure it would matter. But not everyone saw it the same way. My friend Noah, who's known Julian a bit longer than I have, just shook his head and said, Look, yeah, she shouldn't have done it, obviously. But maybe she just panicked. People do stupid stuff when they're scared. I looked at him, waiting for him to take it back or soften it, but he didn't. He just kept talking like what she did was some impulsive white lie. I mean, she probably thought you'd go to Paris, meet some French girl, and just move on. Maybe she just needed a little reassurance, not a breakup. I didn't say anything. What was I supposed to say to that? That my entire year had been shattered like it was just an overreaction? That a signature, a single fake signature, was all it took to undo months of planning, saving, selling? That she looked me in the eye afterward and cried not because she was sorry, but because she got caught? But I didn't really lose it until I told my sister. Her name's Rachel. She's 6 years older than me and has always been the one person in my life who never sugarcoated anything. She doesn't do performative sympathy, doesn't hand out advice like fortune cookies. But she listens. And when I finally told her, sitting on the porch of her townhouse with a bottle of ginger ale she'd poured like it was whiskey, she didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat there with her feet tucked under her and let me talk. I told her about the fake letter, the draft in my cloud, the way Julian stood in her doorway and said she did it because she loved me. I told her about Mason's reaction, about Noah's comment, about how confused I felt, like I couldn't even tell if I was allowed to be angry because everyone was already trying to explain it away. She didn't interrupt, didn't even look at me until I was finished. Then she set down her drink and said, Do you want to spend your life with someone who's so afraid of losing you that they're willing to betray you to keep you? That sentence stopped everything. It was like she'd read my mind, peeled away the doubt I hadn't even wanted to admit was still there. Because that's not love, she said, her voice flat. That's fear, and control, and manipulation dressed up in panic. You don't trap someone in place and call it romance. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She just looked at me and added, You trusted her with your future. And she made a choice. A big, calculated one. That wasn't a moment of weakness. That was a decision. It didn't fix anything. But it gave me a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in days. Because she was right. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't something we could talk through. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about the fact that someone who knew me better than anyone else had taken my future in her hands and broken it on purpose. And then expected me to understand. I wrote the appeal in one sitting, even though my hands were shaking the entire time. I opened a blank document and stared at the cursor for a long moment before I started typing, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't know how to say it without sounding completely unhinged. I ended up just telling the truth, every word of it. I explained what had happened, that I had not, under any circumstance, submitted a withdrawal letter, that it had been done from my personal laptop during a time I was verifiably in class, that I had discovered a draft left open in my cloud editor and could show them timestamps. I attached screenshots of the document, the revision history, the browser logs. I didn't accuse Julianne by name, but I said that someone who had access to my apartment while I was gone had used my computer without my knowledge or permission. At the bottom, I added a copy of a written confession she'd sent me after I confronted her. It was a few messy paragraphs she'd emailed at 2 in the morning the night after we last spoke, full of apologies and thin justifications. But the words were there. I'm sorry I withdrew you from the program. I just couldn't picture you leaving me. It was more than enough. I hit send around 2 a.m. and just stared at the screen for a while, waiting for something to happen. Of course, nothing did. The silence afterward felt like a vacuum. I refreshed my inbox every hour like it would speed anything up. I couldn't eat. I barely left my room. I just kept imagining someone at the university seeing my name and rolling their eyes, already convinced I was some flake who had changed his mind last minute and now wanted a do-over. 3 days later, I got the reply. It came in the afternoon, while I was walking back from the print shop with a sandwich I wasn't even hungry for. My phone buzzed, and I saw the subject line, response to appeal request. I stopped walking and opened it right there on the sidewalk, squinting against the sun. The message was short, polite, official, cold in a way that made my stomach turn. We acknowledge the materials you submitted and appreciate the clarification regarding the circumstances of your withdrawal. However, due to the high demand for this year's exchange program, your place has already been offered to another student. We would be happy to reconsider your application for next year's cycle, should you choose to reapply. That was it. No sympathy, no apology, no room left to negotiate. Just one sentence, neat and final. Your place has already been given to another student. I stood there on the sidewalk with that half-warm sandwich in my hand and just stared at my phone, rereading the email like the words might rearrange themselves if I waited long enough. But they didn't. They never do. I walked home in a daze, cutting through alleys and side streets like I couldn't even remember how to navigate the route anymore. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to keep my breathing steady, but it felt like something was collapsing inside me in slow motion. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet, dull breaking of something that had held me up for months. I couldn't even cry. I just sat there, reading the message again and again, as if some part of me thought that if I memorized it perfectly, maybe I could undo it. Maybe I could go back and make her never step into my room, never touch my laptop, never think that she could save us by destroying me. But I couldn't go back. I couldn't fix it. All I had now was an empty spot where Paris used to be, and the slow, bitter realization that everything I'd worked for had slipped through my fingers while I was too busy trusting the wrong person. One more year. That was what they offered me. Another year of waiting, of staying here, of trying to feel okay in a place I'd already said goodbye to. Another year of trying not to lose the version of myself that still believed I could leave. I didn't plan to go over there. I wasn't rehearsing some speech in my head or psyching myself up in the mirror. I just woke up one morning, stared at the ceiling for a long time, and realized I couldn't keep dragging the weight of it around anymore. I couldn't live inside this constant loop of what ifs, and why did she, and maybe it'll feel different tomorrow. I needed air. I needed it to be over. I texted her and asked if she was home. She said she was, and added a heart. I ignored it. I got in my car, drove over, parked in the spot I used to joke was mine because I'd spent so many nights there. When she opened the door, she looked tired. Like she hadn't been sleeping much either. Her eyes were red. She gave me this soft little smile like she thought we were going to talk things through, maybe patch it up, maybe get to that point where people cry and hug and promise to be better. But I didn't step inside. I just stood in the doorway and said, I can't do this anymore. She blinked fast, like the words didn't make sense to her. Wait, what do you mean? I mean I can't be with you, I said. I've tried to make sense of it. I've tried to understand. But I can't get past what you did. She stood there in silence for a second, then stepped back like she needed space to brace for something. I've changed, she said, her voice cracking. I swear I've changed. I've been going to therapy. I've been journaling. I know I messed up, but I was scared. That's not who I am anymore. I nodded slowly, more out of habit than agreement. You stole a dream from me, I said. That's not something I can get over. That's not some bad argument or misunderstanding. You knew what Paris meant to me. You could have stood beside me, supported me, been proud of me. But instead, you broke it. You broke me. She started crying. The kind of crying that's messy and uncontrolled. The kind that makes people want to reach out and fix it. But I didn't move. I didn't reach. I just stood there and let her cry, because none of it changed the truth. I'd already cried enough for both of us. I don't understand why everything has to be so hard, she said between sobs. Why can't we just start over? Because trust isn't a game, I said. It's not something you bend until it snaps, and then tape back together when it's convenient. I don't hate you, but I don't trust you. And if I don't trust you, we're not anything. She didn't have an answer for that. Just more tears and silence. I gave her a final nod and turned to leave. She didn't follow me. She didn't call my name. She just stood there in the doorway of her apartment, crying into the quiet. And that was the end of it. A few months passed. The weather changed, the campus emptied out for the summer, and life moved forward like it always does, even when you feel like it shouldn't. I stayed behind, picked up extra hours at the print shop, kept my head down. The program in Paris was already underway by then, the Instagram stories from the other students flashing by with cobbled streets, espresso shots, museum selfies. I stopped watching after the second week. I didn't talk about what happened. Not in class. Not at work. Not to people who used to ask me how planning was going and then awkwardly avoided the topic after everything collapsed. But the silence started eating at me. I didn't want pity or attention, but I hated the feeling that she got to walk away from it all clean. That I was the one carrying the whole thing while she still posted selfies with captions like, "Growth isn't linear." So one night, out of nowhere, I opened the TikTok app one barely used and started recording. I didn't script anything. I just talked. I told the whole story from the top. The dream of studying in Paris. The sacrifices. Selling my laptop. The forged letter. The confession. The loss. The breakup. My voice shook at first, but I kept going. When I finished, I stared at the screen for a second, then hit post. I figured maybe a few people would see it. Maybe someone would relate. That was it. By the next morning, it had over 500,000 views. By the end of the week, it was everywhere. People flooded the comments. "You did the right thing. This is what emotional abuse looks like. She sabotaged your future and cried when it didn't work." Strangers were tagging universities, calling it a violation of academic integrity, ethics, whatever term fit. I hadn't named her in the video, but people figured it out. Screenshots surfaced. Posts she'd made from the program's info sessions. Group projects. Tag histories. And then the call came from a friend of hers who still followed me. Julianne had been expelled from the PR department. They cited academic misconduct and a breach of the university's code of ethics. She was completely removed from the program. The department wiped her student bio from the school site. I didn't feel anything. Not anger. Not joy. Not even closure. Just this empty space where I thought something would land. I didn't post a follow-up. I didn't respond to the messages asking for details. I deleted the app a few days later. And then I packed my things. One backpack. A laptop. A notebook. Free shirts. My sketching tablet. I bought a one-way bus ticket to New York. I didn't tell anyone. I just left. No more letters. No more explanations. No more sitting in a place that reminded me of everything I'd lost. The bus pulled out of the station on a cloudy morning. I leaned my head against the window and watched my town disappear behind me like a scene in a movie I'd seen too many times. I didn't know what was waiting on the other end. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Just me, my bag, and whatever I chose to build next. So what would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven her? Fought harder to stay? Or just walked away like I did? I'm curious what you think. Let me know.